Welcome to Future Ready Live, where we talk about topics that will help CPAs, CGMAs, finance and accounting pros prepare for change and transformation. I'm your host, Tom Hood, the EVP of Business Engagement and Growth at the AICPA SEMA, the largest body of professional certified accountants in the world. Today, we're going to be talking about the future of finance and leading into the unknown. Joining me is Pascal Finette, a good friend of mine and also a regular in this show now. Hopefully we'll have him even more times. But let's talk about over nearly 3 decades in the technology space, Pascal has accrued all the experience you'd want in a high-level strategic advisor. He started on the net before there was a web browser, learned his way through founding a series of tech startups, launched a consulting firm to support entrepreneurs in scaling their own, and built a portfolio investing in early stage companies. Finette also held leadership positions at era-defining powerhouses, Google, eBay, and Mozilla. And he was a faculty chair for entrepreneurship and open innovation at Singularity University. He's worn many hats and knows what needs to go on in the brain under each of them to lead effectively. What makes him truly one of a kind, however, is his ability to translate all this experience into teachable insights, principles, and practices. This is what enables him to help corporate leaders and entrepreneurs actually do the things they all say they want to, transform their organizations, build what matters, tackle truly meaningful challenges, and create lasting positive change in the world. He also brings refreshing honesty and a zero tolerance for bullshit to the buzzy intersection of technology, global impact, and culture. And that's what established him as a sought-after speaker, uniquely perceptive communicator of hard truths and creative provocations. Join me in welcoming Pascal Finette to today's show.
Tom, that was quite the bombastic introduction. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for having me again on this absolutely amazing series of conversations you're having.
Well, I also think it's true because I've known you and gotten to work with you now for quite a few years, both in the AICPA side, digital CPA, as well as our new Future Finance initiative. So let's get right to it because it was so great having you keynote our Future Finance Summit in Austin after kicking off our first one in Nashville last year. So let's start with your impressions overall. Like what you stayed for a bit of it, what stuck out for you, and what did you think was different this year?
I think, first of all, we're coming out of a pandemic. What I find so fascinating about this whole COVID situation was that we went into the pandemic pretty much unprepared. As you know, we know from the profession, we had lots and lots of conversations about remote work was this big topic, which was thrust upon us. And there's this really interesting piece in there, which is during the pandemic, I had numerous conversations with members of AICPA and SEMA, as well as, of course, all the firms working in this space. And what we heard over and over again was the world will change, the world has changed, and there's a lot of things we don't want to go back to. And now it feels to me, it's so interesting because we've got this really interesting dichotomy where on one hand, certain things surely have changed. Our, more flexible work, more work from home environments, etc., and our adaptation to that. And then on the other hand, it feels like a lot of us just want to forget anything which happened between early 2020 and kind of like the end of 2021 and just really go back to business as it was before. Meanwhile, the whole world is changing. I mean, if you think about technology, you might be familiar with the current evolvement in developments in artificial intelligence, particularly the recent release of something called ChatGPT, which is this incredible language learning model. And I think it has really fascinating implications for the business, for the way we do business and we interact with our clients. So lots is changing. Even more will change in the near future, in the longer term future. And I think we need to be prepared for that.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's that whole. Well, I think at one point, digital CPA, they called it the great acceleration, right? Because, and we work with another global futurist, Dan Burris, who said that basically we accelerated 5 years during the first year of the pandemic, and some things even more like e-commerce. So to your point, AI is one of those. I've been playing around with Chat GPT. It is amazing, and yeah, it's just it's going to be, and that's just one that's out there in open source. I guarantee you, like Microsoft, Google, all those folks are building their own things that are probably 10 times more powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I think the question for us as leaders in this world, I make no mistake, we're all leaders in this world, right? For me is, how do we best react to this? How do we prepare ourselves for this future? And I think the big point here is that you have to learn to lead into and then in the unknown. And that does require a different mindset and probably also a different tool set for us as leaders.
So let's go right into that, because last year you told us we were all terrified dinosaurs, which stuck out for all these senior finance chiefs, right? I mean, this year we had over 100 of these senior CFOs, chief accounting officers, and you added the uncertainty index as a starting in your presentation, which made me feel even more like a terrified dinosaur. So can you tell the audience, what does this mean to finance and accounting pros? This whole, like you said, accelerated uncertainty, accelerated technologies, transforming stuff. So yeah.
So first of all, let me just say, I don't think you're a terrified dinosaur, just so we're like absolutely clear. It's also a quote which is attributed to a gentleman called Joshua Paulo Lehmann, the co-founder of 3G Capital, one of the largest hedge funds. And, give him a lot of credit, because he literally said this on a stage and said, listen, like there's, so much change happening that I really feel I'm like a terrified dinosaur. On the flip side of that, and I think this goes back to the conversation we had with all these finance professionals, what Joshua does, and I think that's exactly what we have to do as leaders, is he's not just a terrified dinosaur, but he applies that mindset to say, how do I best prepare myself for this future? And what does it actually mean? And I think the core elements really become evident that we have to become even more agile than we might think we are already. And I guarantee you, most of us aren't actually that agile in our organizations. So really becoming much more nimble, much more able to react to change much faster. With that comes the necessity for us to become better learners, to deploy meta learning capabilities, to be able to kind of feel our way into the future instead of relying on this idea that we can predict the future, which we can't to a large extent. And then lastly, there's a component around this, which is really our ability to prototype the future. So to do these little experiments, to try things out, to gather data, to then make much more informed decisions. And I think if you think about the finance profession, clearly, I grew up in a world where we did 5-year plans and they were solid. Like we knew what 5 years will look like. I think we all have a pretty nebulous idea of, what the world will look like in 5 years, to the point that one of our clients, a very large multinational organization, I sat down with their leadership team just before the new year began, and they told me that their chief economist said, we might move into a recession. That is literally like in December, right? So if the chief economist of a multinational corporation can't tell you if we're moving into a recession, yes or no, clearly in the next year, that the world is truly uncertain.
It's incredible, right? The signals are so mixed up. Nobody is like committing to what they think is going to happen, which is totally out of character for all those large organizations like you're talking about. The other part you made, which I think your whole agility part, we started surveying these finance leaders probably after you did this last year, and you showed us the agile piece where finance is the lowest in the corporate department side of the least agile in that respect. And so then when we started surveying it, finance teams have started to say agility is something they think they need to focus on in like the top 3 to 5 skill sets that they're looking at. So we're making a difference, Pascal, with what you brought to us from that perspective. And then this whole idea of being agile and trying things, you did a great job of explaining that in the summit, but you had an acronym I thought was FAIL. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's actually not my acronym, but this is really interesting mental model we have around trying things out. And there's a fear of failure. And make no mistake, no company, no individual, no leader wants to fail.
Right.
And I think this is interesting misnomer. So we have this notion in the startup community forever, which is this whole idea of like, fail forward, fail fast, learn from failure, etc. And I think there's a weirdness to it, because again, like we talk about failing, and we talk about, sometimes it feels to me, at least in the startup community, that we glorify, even like to a fetish, this whole idea around failing. And there's a beautiful reframing, I think, which is necessary around this. And this goes to the acronym you mentioned. So instead of looking at fail as an actual verb, as a thing, consider it an acronym as your first attempt in learning. And I think that's the important thing, because it's really about learning. And it's about your ability to capture the learning and your ability to react to the learning. There's a beautiful, absolutely incredibly studied being done by a gentleman called Dashun Wang at Northwestern University, who showed, using pretty sophisticated AI models, by looking at something like 700,000 grant applications, 58,000 startups, as well as, ironically, terrorist attacks, 170,000 terrorist attacks. He showed that your ability to learn, to iterate quickly, to fail, if you use the acronym, is actually not just prescriptive of success. So post-success, you can say, well, we tried these things and this is why we succeeded. But you can actually make predictions on your ability to be successful in the future. Wow. So I can actually tell you, before you even start, depending on your ability to try things out and learn and have these very quick learning cycles, which again, in the world of uncertainty is quintessential, I can predict how successful you will be. So invitation here for everybody is to really deploy a more nimble approach to actually, trying things out, learning, incorporating those learnings into the organization, and then kind of like move forward into this world of uncertainty.
Yeah. So it's funny. You're describing why we got this group together that ultimately created the summit, right? We have we call it our Future of Finance Leadership Advisory Groups, about 50 large corporate CFOs, well-known names. And it quite frankly shocked me that they wanted to stay together the way they have. So we started out talking about what are the issues they're facing. They were all the same. And then we said, would you like to get together and help us reimagine what finance is going to look like? And one by one, they pretty much all said yes. So we've been meeting now for 18 months, every other month, about an hour and a half. And this group has said, we're all walking this uncertainty journey together. They're all in various phases of finance transformation. They've all got the talent shortage issues that we're all dealing with. But what they've said, and that's what the whole summit was about, as you know, was to bring them together and share stories and learn from each other. Now, I think that's the other part I think about this is I have a saying where I think the collaboration curve is going to beat the experience curve. Because you can't know everything, even in your own domain anymore, the way things are going. But if I know cool people like Pascal and all these finance chiefs, and together we're sharing, we'll all learn faster than we would even on our own. So to your point, this whole fail, first attempt in learning, is about learning and elevating everything you know. So I think that's what brought us together. And it's cool to hear you say that, because I think it says we're like spot on. And that group, that's why they're staying together, is like we want to keep there. And we've been trying a whole bunch of stuff. Some work, some don't. After the summit, we do a big after action review. So we can look, because we did our first one last year, doubled the attendance this year. Now we're trying it again. So yeah, it's all about learning and how we do that. So, well, you're awesome. This is great to have this. So now, let me ask this question, because I think last year you inspired us with the quote that the future is unwritten. It's up to us to write our own story. That was hugely inspirational. This year you added the uncertainty window and introduced multiple futures. Yes. Remember that? I saw the big scope with about 4 or 5 different ones. And I think it all ties into this agile, iterative thinking. But yeah, give us a couple thoughts about that.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a concept which originated out of the world of weather, essentially, weather predictions. So when we look at weather events, particularly hurricanes, for example, there's a concept which has been around for eons, where we talk about the cone of uncertainty. So you essentially say you can predict the movement of, like, say, a hurricane relatively precisely for a short period of time. And then it widens out as you go further into the future. So it widens, it becomes a cone, exactly. And this concept has been applied to the future, because clearly, if you say, what's the future tomorrow, we have a pretty decent understanding what tomorrow look like. It will not look all that much different from today. But the further out you go, the wider your cone of possible futures becomes. And inside of this cone of possible futures is a narrower cone of probable futures, right? So not everything which is possible is probable. So I believe the invitation for us as leaders is twofold. One is internalize this, understand that there is uncertainty we have to deal with, probability we have to deal with. So if you're a finance professional, probability is your friend here. And understanding that it really is on us to figure out what are these boundary conditions? What is the upper and the lower boundary of those possible and probable futures look like? And then see it as an invitation, because, going back to the quote you mentioned earlier, the beauty of the future is it doesn't exist. The beauty of the future is we create the future. Every company, every individual creates the future every day. So the invitation for us is to figure out what is the future, the preferred future we want to have, versus the future we probably tell ourselves, which, sometimes is being referred to as the official future, the version of the future we hold on to because it's the story we tell ourselves. But know that story you can change. Yeah. And sometimes I like to point out, like, it's ironic that we talk about the future as a singular, the future, a future, when in reality there's a enormous amount of futures. And again, like, my invitation here is to strike through the singular, use the plural, and see it as an invitation. And the beauty of all of that is then you see suddenly uncertainty not as a threat, as something you want to run away from, which scares you, terrified dinosaurs, but rather as an invitation, an opening, and a window of opportunity. And this is, I think, where the enlightened leader actually beautifully steps into this future and creates the future.
Yeah. Well, you inspired a whole bunch of chief finance officers doing major transformations, and together they just loved your advice and everything. So Pascal, as always, you were super amazing. Now, just real quick, tell us about an upcoming book that I know you've got coming up, titled what? Disruption?
Yes. So Disruption, Decode the Future, Disrupt Your Industry, Transform Your Business. We wrote this book, I started writing this book 4 years ago, really with an obsession about this topic of disruption. And I think the disappointment I had with, like, a lot of the content we found around disruption is it feels very fatalistic, like, oh my God, disruption is here. And so we wanted to look at this with fresh eyes, to build on the incredible work of Clayton Christensen, who created and coined the term disruptive innovation, and really say, what does it actually mean for a leader? And what the book does is it gives you a framework to understand the future a little bit better, and then goes into the factors we find when companies embark on a disruptive innovation journey, a transformation journey, the factors we find these companies stumble over again and again. So kind of like the anti-patterns, because I believe it's important to name them, to see them, because otherwise you can't fix them. It's similar when you go to a doctor. You need the diagnosis before you actually do anything. Yeah. And then we give you the insights we gained from now more than 300 interviews we've done with practitioners who are world-class in doing transformations, in what works, what are the patterns, the behaviors, the organizational structures which actually work. So incredibly excited to finally get this book out. It was a labor of love. and you'll find it soon on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, wherever you buy your books. You'll find the book. It's called Disrupt Disruption. And thank you for the plug, Tom. Really appreciate it.
I can't wait to get my copy. I hope to get you to sign it soon. When I
absolutely.
get to see you. Thank you. Well, and that's what first got us asking you about coming to our summit, right? It was all about your perspectives on the future and this idea of disruption, because every one of our folks were feeling in the midst of transformation. And they felt like they were feeling their way through a fog, and COVID just made that fog that much thicker.
Yeah. So
everyone trying to feel their way through it, and you certainly helped us a whole lot over these 2 years. So thank you very much. For everyone, our followers out there, you can find Pascal on LinkedIn, Pascal Finette, Finette. You can visit his website at beradical.group, and you can follow him on Twitter at pfinette, all one word, Pfinette. We'll put that in the show notes when this goes, and buy his new book, Disrupt Disruption. Pascal, thank you so much for joining me. And for our audience, don't miss our other Future Ready Live sessions. We'll be back here on LinkedIn the first and third Tuesday of each month at noon Eastern. See you then.